Aloha. Good morning, friends. Aloha, kakahia kakako, and welcome to Hawaii Care Choices Healthcare Talk Story. Happy, beautiful Aloha Tuesday. I'm Tish Lopez, your moderator and host this morning. My wonderful host, Alani, is out on a very well needed and deserved vacation. So we sent our aloha, but we are all gathered here today. Just a friendly reminder, today's talk story is being recorded so that you and others can access it in the future. Every single presentation for the last 3 years are all on our YouTube channel. Simply search Hawaii Care Choices. We are also on Facebook and Instagram. So we have a lot of content on there, as well as our talk stories. So upcoming events, get to know our team, our community members, everybody that we are so excited to work with and we do work with throughout the year is on there. So go ahead, like, follow us, send us a comment, heart, shaka. We would absolutely love to connect with you. We are joining in, or for those of you joining in on Zoom today, the bottom of your screen should look like this. Follow that green arrow and click on the chat box. Say aloha to everyone here. Looks like my awesome guest speaker has already said aloha to everyone. Let us know where you're chatting in from. We definitely want to hear from you. In August, we launched our Empower Your Choice Talk Story series. So as we continue to discuss and explore and the understanding of health equity and how it impacts your access to quality care, doing this webinar, ask all the questions you want, clicking on that Q&A box, following that purple arrow. All right, we are also live on Facebook. So if you are tuning in from Facebook, aloha and mahalo for joining us. Send us your, use that comment box, say aloha, let us know where you're joining in from, chat in questions with that comment box, and share your reactions throughout this talk story. We love to see the hearts, the thumbs up, and even the care button. Also, feel free to share this live video with your friends or someone you may know that would benefit from the awesome information that is shared today. So without further ado, I am so excited to share our special guest speaker, our dear friend and no stranger to Talk Story. And you may have seen him before, Nicolas Baños, who serves as the Hawaii Island Regional Coordinator for Alzheimer's Association Aloha Chapter. Aloha, Nick.
Aloha, Tish. Thanks for having me back. And like you said, yeah, I was looking back at our recordings, and I think a few months ago I was talking about some of the cool updates in the research and treatment space. So that's super exciting. So thanks for having me back.
Yes, it's so good. So, friends, today on Talk a Story, Nick is going to be sharing more information, but really talking about the importance of learning how to do a doctor's visit and tending to the legal issues if if your loved one is kind of experiencing some signs of Alzheimer's or dementia. So, doing things before their disease progresses too far along. So, if you're new to caring for someone with dementia, you do not want to miss this information. Friends on Facebook Live, if you know someone who possibly will be caring for someone with dementia, please send that live video to them. But if they miss it, it's still recorded. So they're still going to get this awesome information. All right, Nick, without further ado, please give a warm round welcome to Nicolas Dos Baños.
All right. Mahalo again, Tish. And again, thanks for having me back, Hawaii Care Choices. Before I begin, I just want to tell you a little bit about myself. For those of you who I don't know or haven't met, or you haven't been on one of our talk stories with me, my name is Nick, and I have been with the Alzheimer's Association for 3 years. Prior to this, I actually worked at Hawaii Care Choices for a little bit. And before that, I was with the Hawaii County Office of Aging for 10 years. So, I've been working in this space with families and caregivers and, older individuals for quite some time. Many of which who are touched by Alzheimer's disease or other dementia. Personally, my grandfather passed away with Alzheimer's disease in the early 2000s, and my grandmother is still with us. She's going to be 99 in a few weeks, and she's living with dementia as well. So, our family has been a part of this dementia journey personally for quite some time. So, it's an honor to be a part of this program and part of the association from a personal standpoint as well. But today we're going to be talking a lot about that first part of the journey. And I'm going to just say first, everybody's journey is going to be a little bit different. even though Alzheimer's disease has a trajectory that's pretty similar across changes in people, uh, it's going to be a little bit different for everybody. I always tell folks, you never know what you're going to get. We can tell you some of the possibilities, but there's no A, B, C, D, E, F, G handbook on this. If there was, I'd be very rich and I wouldn't be here today working for the association. Everybody would have what they needed, but that is not the case. So today we're going to be talking about our program today is called Dementia Conversations. I'm going to start sharing my slides and let me know if they're all good to go.
I see it on my end, nice and clear.
Perfect. All right. So it's called Dementia Conversations because there's a very interesting piece of the dementia journey that pretty much everybody is going to go through, which is that beginning stage of just experiencing some of the symptoms. And I will say that it's often that people with these symptoms are not the first to notice them. It's often a family member, a friend, or maybe even a doctor or somebody outside watching these changes happen. And that's often what we look at whenever there's a need to be concerned. One of the programs we have and one of the biggest things we are trying to get out there to the public is what we call the 10 warning signs of Alzheimer's, because those are the 10 most common things that you see leading up into possible dementia. It's very, I think everybody's pretty familiar with the memory loss piece of Alzheimer's disease, but there are a couple of other things that you could look for. And, I definitely want to share that later on today. Maybe I'll send you the link and you folks can check it out. Or maybe that's something we can talk about in another talk story. But today we'll talk about dementia conversations and really talk about some of the most difficult parts of the start of this journey, in a sense. The first one, they're going to the doctor. That's probably one of the toughest parts of this journey. I'm not saying that any part is more easy or, less difficult, but it is very, very difficult to tell someone, hey, I think there are some changes and I think you got to go see a doctor. For the most part, that's often met with things like denial, regret, or, just denial, or, I'm just getting old. Quick note, Alzheimer's disease is not a normal part of aging. It does not happen to everyone. So, it's not just getting old. That's not what it is. Driving, another big one, because when you think about when you got your license, that's like one of the big life independence markers, right? That's one of the milestones in our adult lives, to get our license and drive and go wherever we want. So when it comes to dementia and Alzheimer's and folks not being able to figure out how to get through, their usual routine driving around town. I mean, some people with dementia can drive to KTA and back home because they've done it for so long. But if something goes off and there's like a roadblock or something, and they can't figure out how to get around it and back home, you have some safety issues, not just for them, but for other people on the road. So driving is a tough one. And all of this, when these signs start showing up, one of the things I try to help families with is just the legal aspect of things. And we'll talk a little bit more about why. So today we'll talk a little bit about ways to break the ice. I know that it's not the easiest. And this is where you're going to have to figure out your loved one the best. You know them the best, and you figure out what might be the best way. Okay. One thing that I try to help families with as well is building a plan of just some steps that you can take. It's not going to be easy. Usually does not go very well when you have to bring this conversation up. It's usually met, like I said, with denial, sometimes straight up anger. So just being ready for what kind of steps you might have to take if it goes that route. And also just how to work with that person, when they are dealing with, you can imagine how tough it is for them to hear something like that, right? And they're probably, a lot of times in this early stage, they might actually know that they are experiencing some of these changes, and it can be really, really hard on them. And we'll end with talking about some of the resources from the association, as well as some of the other things that you might want to keep in your back pocket. So let's go through some of the first things. Main thing, I think as caregivers, it's really hard because a lot of caregivers are often either spouse or child. A lot of times when it's the child, they are in a generation where they might have children of their own, or they're still working. And so this is just one additional thing that they have to deal with, and it can be really tough. However, from the person's experiencing these symptoms, they can have some thoughts as well. I'm sure there's some of these examples here, right? Like, oh, don't worry about me. I'll be fine. This is just what happens. It's okay. I'm just getting older. It's bound to happen. Whatever it is, there's so many things that can be going through their mind. And I think as caregivers, one of the first things is just really understanding that they are definitely dealing with some things if this is what's happening to them. I think one of the biggest things, though, that I encourage folks to do is to not wait. I rather have somebody start the conversation with their loved one or with their doctor if it's somebody recognizing these things in themselves and say, you know what, I lost my keys or something like that, or I keep forgetting so and so's name. Check it out. I rather have you go to the doctor and have them say, oh no, it's stress or sleep, whatever, something else. You're good. But sooner than later, I think it's really unfortunate that maybe culturally we don't like to talk about these things. Local style, just be quiet. Don't talk about Tutu. We got to respect her. But in the end, when you wait too long, it's really hard to have a conversation with these people living with possible dementia when they've already gone too far into those symptoms. It's kind of staggering. When we did a survey across the nation, 70+ % of people would want to know that I have this diagnosis. So tell me. But on the flip side, only 40% actually get that diagnosis. So there's still a big gap there on who wants to know and who actually knows, because it can be hard if you wait too long. So starting sooner than later, again, I always encourage that. Now, I've talked a little bit about a plan, develop a plan for finesse. I'll give you an example. When I was working at the county, I had a family that was dealing with this situation, how to tell grandma that, oh, I think something's going on with her memory. And so their idea of doing this, and I'm just giving this as an example, I'm not promoting it or saying it's wrong, was their goal was, okay, you know what, let's just put together like a luau, and we're going to have like a hibachi barbecue and party, and then tell her all together as a family, hey, grandma, I think you have dementia. Now, I kind of stepped back and said, well, I don't know if that's the best place or time or space to do that. But again, it is up to you. You guys know your loved ones best. It is never gonna, I've never had somebody say, oh, that's cool, I have dementia, possibly. It's probably going to be emotional one way or the other, but just think of the best way that you might present this to your loved one or your friend or whoever it is. I think, first of all, they have to be willing to have that discussion. I mean, you don't want to just surprise them one day, like, hey, good morning. At the breakfast table, can you imagine? Good morning, by the way, I think you have dementia. You got to put a little bit of thought there just because they could be feeling some of that as well. I always encourage people to take notes about what they see, as far as changes. Again, when you're looking at dementia or possible dementia, it's things, you're looking at things that differ from the norm. So if you were terrible at losing things always, like if you're always losing things anyway, that's your norm, I don't think that would be a cause to worry if that's your norm. But what a lot of folks notice is, I'll give you an example, finances. You see that where they can no longer balance their checkbook, or they're forgetting to pay their bills, and they've always been on time for decades. Those are the kind of changes that you might want to take notes on. Or another one is behavior. They start acting out or being angry a lot, and then they were never an angry person. Those kinds of changes. So something different from the norm. Also, over time, I tell families, look at what's happening over time, because this is going to help in terms of diagnosis, which we'll get to later. This is going to help put together some puzzle pieces. Okay. Practice in advance. Now, I know, this is something that sometimes if you're doing a speech or something, you want to practice in the mirror, right? Good afternoon. My name is Nick. It's going to be hard, I think, unless you are very good, gifted in that. It's not easy to have to say, hey, I want to talk to you because I've noticed some changes, and, what do you think? Again, I've never had a family tell me, oh, it was so easy. My mom just smiled and said, sure, let's go to the doctor. I don't think I've ever had a case like that. So just know, don't be, don't be afraid if it doesn't go well the first time. But think about some of the things you might want to say. Even if that previous box there, maybe point out some examples if you think that's appropriate. But I think just rehearsing what you might want to say, also who might want to say it, and where, because you want to also look at environment. Right? Going back to that example of that family who said they were going to have a luau, if they think that's the best way to do it because that's how grandma is, rock and roll, do it. But for the most part, I think it's a lot more. It's a lot less party style when you have to tell somebody these things that you're noticing. But so look at the environment. Also prep yourself. I mean, if you're panicking, trying to tell them, they might pick up on that, and it's already going to set you up for a little bit of a struggle. So again, best try to be comfortable in a comfortable space with comfortable people. Some people prefer to be in a neutral space. When we were at the Office of Aging, there's like a counseling room. They would bring them there. We talk together. Some folks prefer to do it maybe at the doctor's office where they can have the doctor to give that medical input. So it really depends on your loved one. But generally here you're looking at just having empathy for them because if they are experiencing changes, that's probably not an easy thing for them. Okay, so let's talk about that. Going to the doctor. So again, dementia is not a normal part of aging. That is not something that happens to everyone. But so aside from those typical changes like your skin wrinkling and your hair changing color and whatnot, or for me, falling out, those are typical age-related changes. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about things that are those 10 warning signs, which again, I'll share later on today. But one of the things that I work with families again a lot on is that initial going to the doctor, how to get them there. I think using those changes as references can be really helpful because you think about it this way, right? Like if somebody starts limping all the time, and you're going to say, "Oh, you looks like your leg is you're in pain or something. Maybe we should have it checked out." Very similar to that, right? Except instead of your leg being sore, maybe I noticed that you are repeating a lot. Did you notice that? Maybe we should have it checked out. So using those examples or your observations can be helpful. I think one of the things that also works is just saying the thing that, well, if it's dementia, if it's not dementia, it could be something else, which it can be. So just kind of, I guess, smoothing it out a little bit by saying, hey, let's just get it checked out. Again, this is really hard if you wait till it's very, very far into the disease progression, where they're already obviously showing signs of something cognitively, whether it's dementia or not. It's really hard to convince them or to explain to them that, hey, you're changing, we should go to the doctor. But you got to remember, right? There are so many things. Just going to the doctor can be something scary for a lot of folks, especially for those who maybe are not normally seeing their physician or any kind of practitioner. Just going again for something special could be hard. I think that's why a lot of times if somebody is regularly seeing their doctor, I try to help the family work that into their normal checkups. So it's not just something off, where it's like, why do I have to go to the doctor for this? Anything to normalize it. But you can imagine, they would be reluctant to go because it is not going to be fun to talk about memory loss, changes, and those kinds of things. And, as of now, there's no cure to Alzheimer's disease. That's, when you get that diagnosis, it can be pretty, I can imagine, it can be pretty hard. Now, for families, I think it's, again, I'm going to go back to, your loved one best. Figure out who's the best person to deliver the news, who should go with them to the doctor. Just kind of, like we said earlier, make a plan as to what you're going to try to make happen, in other words, because even though you have a plan, it might not work, but hey, we're going to go with it. Okay, next we're going to see a video from Donna, and she's going to talk a little bit about how her conversation went.
I think you have to be honest. I think that's the important thing with it. To get a loved one to the doctor, I think you just need to be candid and honest of what are you trying to do. We're trying to understand what we're up against. It's just so important to do that because you can't battle something that you don't know what you're battling. Again, it may not have been Alzheimer's, it could have been depression, it could have been so many other things. And guess what? There's other things you can do to take care of those issues as well. But that's what you need to be able to do. You can't ignore something, it's not going to go away.
So as you heard Donna say, right, it could be something else. A lot of times that's that little bit of hope that gets them to say, okay, yeah, let's go get it checked out. However, let's talk a little bit more about some tips for going to the doctor. So let's say we get them there or we get them to agree. You got to be thinking about what kind of things might scare them off. The word Alzheimer's or dementia, those words in themselves are scary. So again, even if you have an inkling that maybe mom or dad or whoever might be showing these signs, maybe we keep those words out of the conversation and just say, hey, there's some, changes that we noticed. You've noticed them too. Let's just check it out at the doctor. Maybe we don't need to have that word Alzheimer's in there at all. So just think about some of the words you might want to use and might want to avoid. Sometimes, and I've heard this too, people don't want to go to the doctor because I gotta pay the copay. Well, if you're 65 and older and have Medicare, it is part of the annual wellness visit, which I don't think is too much as far as a copay. But this is where on the physician side or on the medical care, the healthcare side, they should be screening folks in Medicare 65 plus for memory cognitive issues as already. And for the most part, I'm happy to hear that they are. Even if you're healthy, for the most part, they should be doing something. If anybody's familiar with one of the tests that they use often, it's remembering 3 words and repeating it back and drawing the clock. So that's an example of a test called the mini cog, which is one of the ones that they use in the annual wellness visit. Now, what they're doing is whether you pass it or not is going to tell them maybe we should look at something further. And often somebody that is having changes, if you recognize this early on, sometimes they will pass those paper-based tests and it's okay. But at least it's on the doctor's radar to watch this as time goes on. And that's why those notes from you are going to be really important, because the doctor only sees the patient for 15 minutes max. They don't know what happens at home. So even if they pass that test in the office, you got to be able to share a little bit about it if you feel there's a concern to bring up with the doctor. And we'll talk a little bit about how you can do that as well. But if you are afraid of the cost of healthcare, if you have Medicare, for the most part, your annual wellness visit should include some kind of cognitive health screening. If not, you can ask for it. Pair an enjoyable outing with your doctor's visit. Now, I know that this starts to sound like bribery. I'm going to teach you a little term that we use in this field. It's called the therapeutic fib, basically a white lie. But when it comes to dementia and Alzheimer's, the goals change a little bit. The goals are not being logical and correct. It's really honoring feelings and how they are feeling at that moment. If they are experiencing cognitive challenges, dementia or not, they may not have the ability to be as nimble thought-wise as we are. So we have to kind of get into their world. And that's one of the biggest tips I have. Really think about how they're thinking and, unless it's dangerous, go with what they're thinking. Okay. But parent enjoyable outing. We've done this with my grandma, saying, hey, we're going to go to lunch, but first we're going to stop off at the doctor. And, it works. It worked. I know a lot of people feel like this is a little bit like kids, but, again, the goal is different. When you are dealing with somebody with dementia, their brain is already struggling. You have to be able to basically, have a malleable world where nothing is set, and you just kind of help the person get guided to wherever they need to go. So you can do that as well. Invite family to communicate concerns with the doctor. Like I was saying, if the person doesn't want to go, or maybe they don't obviously show the signs within the doctor's visit, you could hand those notes over. So some families have done that, where they just jotted down some notes saying, over the last 3 months, I've noticed mom has become more forgetful. She started misplacing her purse. She gets lost and, driving to KTA or whatever. Those kinds of notes can be helpful to tell the doctor, okay, I think I should just watch this or do further testing. And often it's going to be one or more family members who notice this. And there's that therapeutic fib I mentioned. So, I've had families have to do this as well, where they don't tell them that that's what they're going to the doctor for, because again, like we said in that first box, the whole concept and some of the terms can be scary, right? Like, hey, we're going to go check your brain just in case. That's scary. So, maybe just tell them it's a regular checkup, because we just want to make sure that we're all healthy. Or I know some families, if it's a spouse, they might schedule their appointment together, So those are some tips to getting that doctor's visits going. Of course, it is not going to be smooth for the most part unless you catch it very early on. It can be a challenge. I will say that. So later on, I'll talk a little bit about our care consultation services, where if you need help doing this with your loved one, we can walk through some scenarios of what you're doing, because everybody's experience will be a little bit different.
Hey, Nick, I did get a question from
Okay,
our
go ahead.
listeners.
Sure.
Since we're talking about, kind of going to the doctor. So how can I support my mother who can be stubborn and is mean to the doctor when he's asking questions?
Mean to the doctor when you ask them questions. One of the things I also tell families is you want to let them be themselves at the appointment. If they're mean to the doctor, that is going to flag the doctor in itself to say, okay, they're defensive or something I should look at, because typically you're not mean to your doctor. I mean, most people are not. Typically, people honor and revere their doctors and listen to them. So when they see that type of behavior, I would let it happen, because that's going to be like, hey, look, see, here's an example. Any kind of, I wouldn't say evidence, but any kind of, examples of how you're experiencing things at home, those changes with your loved one. If you can bring them into the doctor's office on paper or in the flesh like that, that's actually helpful. I mean, I know it sounds a little bit scary and weird and you don't want to be shamed, but that can be helpful to let them see what you're dealing with, honestly.
Thanks, Nick.
Sure. All right, we're gonna move on to the next conversation that also is very, very difficult, which is stopping driving. With dementia and Alzheimer's disease in particular, folks start to lose memory, short-term memory. So that's why, even though they might be able to do their KTA run every Saturday because it's the same drive they've done for decades, if there's a traffic stop or some kind of roadblock or an accident and they have to reroute and go another way, and if they can't figure that out, that's very scary. For not just for them again, but for other people. And we don't want that to happen. So again, just because somebody might be showing these signs, you want to look for signs that are related to driving before this even comes up. I mean, you don't want to be like, okay, you're old now, let's just take away your license. That's not, I don't recommend that way. But accidents, traffic tickets, scrapes on the car, or mistakes while driving, I think it's very interesting, because I used to watch some of our clients who would come to the Office of Aging, and you would see the scrapes on the corners, meaning they're probably hitting something again and again, right? Because it's like that yellow paint from maybe like a guard or something like that. And those are the kind of things you actually want to look at. Most times they won't tell you that, hey, I hit someone, or maybe they forgot, So you, as the watcher, might have to kind of do a walk around, kind of like when you do a rental car check-in, you want to see are there any new dents, any new scrapes, or is there a straight up accident that keeps happening? And it can be as subtle as scraping the little, sidewalk thing, the little curb, or it could be, I've had people ram into their house. I mean, because they can't figure out the brake and the gas. So whatever it is, again, these are things you're observing. Again, take notes. But until these things happen, of course, probably no concern. But let's talk a little bit about how you can do this conversation. We're going to start with Chris. He's going to share a little bit about how he experienced this conversation.
There's no exact answer on this is when you stop driving. You can tell when coming up to an intersection, as an example, the ability to understand what's going on around you was starting to deteriorate a little bit. Being on the highway with cars on both sides becomes a little bit more difficult. And first and foremost, the safety of everybody in the car, as well as other drivers on the road. You think about that, and you want to make sure you're not putting anybody in danger. But then the difficult part is telling your dad, who you love, and he loves driving, and he's used to it, that he can no longer do that. But then even then, taking the keys away full time was very difficult. The doctor was very helpful in just saying, medically, you can't do this anymore. But my mother had the hardest time with this because she knew how much this was going to hurt him as well. And this is one of the first things that we had to deal with as a family when it came to telling my dad that he had to stop doing something because of this disease, that meant a lot to him.
So again, the independence that comes with driving, maybe it's not the driving itself, but just the independence and the ability to go wherever you want, is often what's being challenged. So let's talk a little bit about this conversation. Again, plan ahead before you have a major accident. It is unfortunate. Sometimes you do have to wait for that to happen so that they can see it. But we want to prevent that as much as possible. Express your concerns about the changes. There are some really interesting ways you can do this. On our website, there's another section about driving specifically where you can see some reenactments of videos, some video reenactments of how folks might want to present this. A lot of times it's, saying, hey, I noticed you're getting lost a lot when you're driving. Or, you called me from the side of the road because you couldn't figure out how to get to the rubbish dump. That's worrying me, right? So any kind of, again, examples like we were talking about earlier that you've noticed can be helpful in this conversation. Appealing to their sense of responsibility. It's not just them that they're putting at risk, right? It's other drivers, other people out there. So appeal to those things, right? Like, hey, what if, you want to hit somebody else, right? You don't want to send people to the hospital. So you can also, add that in as well. I'm going to play a video again about how, a person might have a little bit of resistance to this conversation. And then we'll come back to a few more tips.
Some tips on having the conversation is pointing out, especially for my father, the potential danger to others that it may cause if he's behind the wheel. And just talking about it from the standpoint that this is not only the best thing for you, but this is also the best thing for others around you. And these are some of the alternatives, making sure that this is what's going to happen, having a plan. If mom can't take you, then Uncle Thomas or will be here to take you, and we will make sure that you're getting out of the house and that you're doing some things. So, presenting the bad news, but then also presenting the plan. And for my father, that's really, really important to have a plan.
So that's going to be, of course, a natural part, because more often than not, if you have this conversation, they'll say, well, who's going to take me to church? Who's going to take me to the store? Who's going to blah, blah, blah. So have some ideas ready, because if not, you're kind of stuck, right? I think that can be really challenging, but if you have people who are willing to do it, I think making sure that they are willing and able to do it, make sure that's part of the plan before you present those options. Public transportation, our county here, Hawaii County, has a coordinated services for the elderly. As long as the client can basically get around, to whatever they need to, they can jump on with other riders, get to their doctor's appointment and get picked up. Again, if that's safe for them, if their cognitive abilities still allow them to do that, but at least it takes them off the road as far as driving. But whatever it is, figure out what you're going to tell them ahead of time, because more often than not, they will bring that excuse to the table and say, well, you're not going to take me. So either you better be ready to say, yes, I am, or have some idea of who's going to take them to wherever they need to go. And this is where, using the doctors can be helpful. I think in one of the examples he said, right, the doctor told his dad, I don't think this is safe. For the most part, doctors are, revered as, okay, I got to listen to my doctor. I've had my grandma tell me that, like, hey, why are you telling me this? You're not my doctor. Fine. That's not uncommon. But when the doctor does tell them, there's a little bit more, I don't know. I don't know what the word is, legitimacy to the whole thing. And if it's not the doctor, it could be a pastor, somebody from their church, a priest, or maybe even a friend that's not you. Oftentimes, us as the family member, we're too close to the situation. We're too deep in it, and they're not going to listen to us. So whoever it might be, figure out who that is, and that can maybe be part of the conversation team. And I think that's going to be really helpful. I will say this, a lot of times you as the main caregiver might be the trigger, just because you're always there and they know you.
Talking to somebody about stopping driving, I think it's most important to understand that that is tied to someone's independence more than most things. And so by saying you can't do this anymore is like telling the person, it's like ripping away their independence. And that doesn't feel good for anybody. I know that I've always tried to put myself in that situation. What would I think if someone was saying this to me? You don't get to do this anymore. And how would I feel? And how would I want somebody to talk to me about this? And so if you try to put, I think sometimes too many people try to approach it as, very punitive. And I'm doing what's right for you. So why don't you understand, without really turning the tables and putting themselves in that position, understanding, how helpless that feels to take those things away. It's important to be thoughtful about what that experience is like for the individual.
So again, she summed it up really well. With think about how it is for that individual and the changes that they are experiencing. I mean, I get upset when McDonald's ice cream machine goes down, which is pretty much 50% of the time. But just think about how that affects you. I mean, okay, maybe not ice cream, but just something changes in your life and how that affects you. This is huge, right? For somebody who is now going to have to give up driving, can be really, really hard for them.
So Nick,
All
we
right.
had we had another question from a listener, a little bit different. So my grandpa has dementia and his disease progression has been for a few years. We've had the conversation with him that he can't drive anymore, but often he forgets and he says, I'm a grown man, you can't tell me I can't drive. How do I approach the situation to help him, but also be safe?
That's a great question. And this is where, again, the therapeutic fib plus some creativity is going to have to be used. I have a family that actually what they did was they disconnected the battery and said, "Oh my gosh, your car's not working, and we got to take it in." And this is might not work if he still has the whereabouts to figure out how to put the battery back on. Like my dad's a mechanic, so I don't think that will work with him. But for some people, that's what they do. And I also had another family member when they tried to do something like that. The father, I believe it was still able to call the repair shop and have the car fixed. And so what they had to do was call the repair shop and say, "Hey, part of the skit is going to be, hey, yeah, we're ordering the part. We'll let you know when it comes in." Again, therapeutic fib, but it's either going to be that, and hopefully they accept the answer, or you're going to have this argument every single time. So, it's really hard. I think from my family, I think about my grandma when we finally took her car away. It was about a year before she stopped bothering us about it. So this is where, as caregivers, you're going to be gaining a lot of new skills. You're going to be gaining some chainmail armor, basically, when it comes to these kinds of comments, because it can be hurtful and it can be tough to deal with and to hear all the time. So, you're going to have to think of a creative way, even if you have to get other people involved, like the shop or whoever else, or friends. A lot of times friends might infiltrate in a sense and say, "Oh, looks like your battery is just off." Thanks, friend. So, even whoever it is that might need to know what's going on in this situation, it might be helpful to have them be part of the conversation. Of course, you want to honor your loved ones' privacy. So it's almost like a need to know basis. But if it's going to help you in the long run with your relationship, you might want to share some of the situation with them. Again, that example that I gave you just about the shop knowing that, okay, dad has dementia, he's trying to drive, but I don't want him to because he cannot. And having them with that typical answer of, "Okay, we're getting the part, I'll let you know when it comes in." Dad might call him a couple times a week, but they know the drill. Okay, and that's a lot to ask. I mean, that can be a lot to ask, but this is where educating folks about dementia and Alzheimer's is really, really, part of my job, not just for people who are in it, but for the community at large, because we might meet people with dementia out there just in our regular lives. So, yeah, it's going to be tough. But again, I'm happy to do one-on-one consultations to kind of think of, ways that might work. But great question. Okay. In the last section, we're going to talk about legal planning. We talked about driving, which is, again, independence, right? I think one of the biggest things that people need to work on, because I've seen a lot of families wait too late, are those legal and financial issues.
financially, this disease will increase the cost of living. It's just a fact. So planning for those extra costs is that much more important than what you were planning for before. And so you have to review everything that's in place, see what changes need to be made, both legally and financially, and you have to monitor that going forward afterwards too.
So again, talking about money is also one of those tough decisions, and not just money, but the legality of things. House ownership, who's my power of attorney, who's going to be my healthcare directive agent. So again, very similar to driving and the doctor's visits, it can be very uncomfortable. But again, sooner than later is going to be basically the key again, and it has to be talked about. On the far end of the spectrum, if you don't do anything and no legal plans are in place, there are some processes that go through the court system. You know, they're not that, from what I hear, they're not that bad, but if you can prevent that, you know, and have that person's voice be a part of their planning, I think that's the main thing.
Here's what I've come to after all of this. That it's the most loving and kind thing you can do for them is to be honest with them and say, this is like a really scary thing. And I feel a lot of discomfort bringing this up to you, but you know, I tell them, if you're going to be the one who's going to take them on this journey, then you have to tell them, I'm going to be here on this journey with you. And there are things that we have to do to get this in place. We're going to go on this journey together. I've told you I'm going to be here with you till the end. So let's get this ready. It's like we're going to go on an ocean ship. We've got to get things packed up. We've got to figure out what we're taking with us. We got to get ready. And the things that we have to get ready, we have to make sure that we know which doctors you're going to be using. I need to get this signed, okay? So that if you go in there and they have to do surgery, for example, I got to have this durable power of attorney for health care for you. I have to have this worked out, okay? Now, if for some reason, okay, you need to go to rehab after something, I have to have these documents here, the financial stuff, so I can get these things taken care of for you while this is going on. I don't want to have anything get in the way of us being able to progress and keep doing this. I said, it seems hard because it's hard in our heads. You know, everybody's read about people who've stolen from elderly people, who've done these horrible things. But if you're the person who's approaching this with loving kindness and compassion, and you're willing to take this person on this journey, you're not doing a bad thing. You're doing the right thing by talking to them about it. And you approach it from the standpoint of, I'm here for you. I'm doing this for you. We're going to do this together. And I'm going to help you through this. And these are the tools that I need to make sure that we can do this.
So let's talk a little bit about how the legal and financial planning might go. So again, like she was saying, right, you're in it together. I think that's one of the, from an emotional standpoint and a human standpoint, an awesome thing to do. Again, not every family member might show up at the table because it's not for everyone, and you as the caregiver or whoever it's going to be might have to just be okay with that. It's really tough, but whoever it is you're supporting, tell them, ask questions and gather documents. You know, people have, especially the older generations, I mean, some of their documents are handwritten, you know, but whatever you have, figure out what's there, what's existing already, who needs to be involved as well. And what questions, what do you need to know? You know, whether it's where's your birth certificate or, you know, where's your whatever, get those things together. And again, maybe normalize this a little bit, right? Not make it about, well, because you have impossible dementia, we're going to do, no, honestly, everybody should be doing this for their legal and financial future. So just kind of normalizing that this is just what we should do. Again, we don't want to overwhelm them, and it can be really tricky, especially if you're talking about things like, you know, their land ownership or their house ownership or, you know, their trust, whatever. Legal stuff is already kind of yucky with the jargon. So if you need to, maybe take one piece of it. Let's just do power of attorney stuff today. Get that done. Okay, let's talk about property stuff later. Again, try to break it up if it seems like it's going to be a little bit too much. And again, involve others as needed. I do want to mention for those who are 60 and older, the Office of Aging has services through Legal Aid Society of Hawaii to provide you support with doing some of these documents, your power, simple will, power of attorney. As long as there's nothing too complex, that's a common service that they provide. And if that's something you're interested in, just contact your Aging and Disability Resource Center or your Hawaii County Office of Aging. If anybody needs that number, I'm happy to give that to you as well. But basically think of who else needs to be involved, whether legally or just family-wise. And this is just a really quick diagram to show, who else you might want to consider when it comes to building that team. Like she was saying, I think her name was Julie. It's like you're going on an ocean cruise and you have to get ready for that ship, right? And what are we going to pack? Who's going to come with us? So, of course, in the middle is a family, your medical team, which is your doctors, maybe specialists eventually. What friends do you need to think about? Church members, anybody at work? I've had folks who are diagnosed who are still working. So how do you deal with that as part of the conversation? And what resources are there? So this is where there's a ton of information on our website. My main thing is, check it out, alz.org. There are so many things. I'm not going to go through each of these, except for the helpline. That's a 24/7 helpline every single day of every hour of every single day of the year. They are there. And there are also some clinicians, master's level clinicians on that line, meaning they are like therapists who can help you if it's just too much for you and you just need somebody to talk to. So even if you're asking, you need that kind of help, or just something like, hey, what is dementia again? Anything, give them a call. But check out our website, alz.org. If you want to get to the local Aloha Chapter website, it's alz.org/Hawaii spelled out, HAWAII. So please check the website out. Again, this is not something you can do alone. And this is where I offer, again, whether through the helpline or through myself, happy to help you with care consultations, because having that one-on-one is really going to help you with the real situation that you're going through. Maybe what we talked about today touches on some of your experience, but it might not be exactly what you are experiencing. And so that's why, every case is going to be different. I encourage you to reach out to us and, ask your questions, and let's see what we can plan together. So with that said, here's our helpline. If all else fails, check us out online or give us a call there. And that is the end of my presentation. Really quickly though, aside from our care consultations and programs like this one, we also have support groups. We have our in-person ones started back up on the island. We have one in Hilo and one in Waimea. Tish, maybe I can share that with you and you can share that with our participants today. But we also have 2 virtual ones. Our island is pretty big. And, if you're living in far districts where you might be the only one, virtual sometimes is best. And sometimes virtual is best because you can't leave your loved one to go to a support group, and that's okay. So I want to end there and I'll see if there are any questions for me.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Nick. Yes, please share that information. I can email it to all of our listeners here because we just love to share this resource. I have learned so much from, this presentation. And as I was growing up, my grandma had dementia. I was younger at the time, so I kind of seen some of these things happen. But now looking at it as on the caregiver perspective, it can be very stressful. It can be, such difficult conversations that you have to have with your loved ones, right? So I'm so glad you're a resource in our community. Friends, if you need his help, please call that helpline. But we're going to take some questions right now. So Nick, you kind of go in between dementia and Alzheimer's disease. And there's always the question, what's the difference? Do they overlap? I know I remember in our first talk story about 2 soups. So if you could please share more.
Sure. So I will use the 2 soups. So think of dementia as the term soup, and think of Alzheimer's disease as chicken noodle soup. It's just a type of dementia or a cause of dementia. It is not the only kind. You have one of the other ones that is pretty common is called vascular dementia, which is caused by a lot of times strokes where brain bleeding is happening, which causes these same symptoms. So it is Alzheimer's disease is a type of dementia or a cause of dementia in a sense. Dementia is the term for any kind of decline in memory, changes in behavior, and some of the things that we had mentioned earlier. And going along with this question, often families are like, well, does it matter? yeah, it can matter, because if we are looking at treatment, we want to know specifically what it is. But often in the early stages of getting a diagnosis, they will blanket state it, the doctors will blanket it with it's dementia of some sort. They don't know specifically what type maybe until they do further tests. But just remember, you might not get that specific test diagnosis unless you do some of the testing.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay. So soup being dementia, chicken noodle soup being Alzheimer's.
And I'll say the reason why, I think one of the reasons why we hear those terms interchanged a lot is because Alzheimer's is the most common type. I think it's 60 to 70% often when somebody's experiencing these kinds of changes and, dementia symptoms, it is often the Alzheimer's type. But it is possible to have more than one type. Say that as well.
Ah, I see. Okay. Okay. So they can overlap in some way, or
Yes.
just, be present together. Okay. So you mentioned there is no cure, but there is some, talk about medications that are out there that can help. Are we closer to a cure?
Closer than ever. So, in the late 90s and early 2000s, the medications, the treatments that came out were to deal with the symptoms. So what you see is a lot of times people feeling like it's curing them, but what it's doing is it's calming them down a little bit, which might maybe help with some of the repetitiveness that is common in Alzheimer's. So even though there's a lot of hope when you see those kinds of symptomatic changes, those prior treatments were basically just doing the best it could with whatever's left functioning in the brain. As of 2021, I believe was the first approval, you have this new type of drug, they call them disease-modifying drugs. So unlike the prior treatments, these new treatments actually work on the underlying biology, meaning in our prior talk, we had a little bit of a diagram that showed what happens in Alzheimer's, where the proteins basically get all messed up and stuck, and that hardening of the proteins is what causes, or is one of the ways that they diagnose Alzheimer's. These new treatments actually work on those proteins. And so it's not like just taking care of symptoms, it's literally working on those underlying biological changes that cause Alzheimer's disease. Now, these current treatments are not being considered a cure by any means. What we're considering it is being able to buy you more quality time. Whereas maybe the severity or the length of time that you have the Alzheimer's, those end stage type of symptoms maybe is not as drastic or as long. So again, we're not at a cure yet, but these drugs are showing us that there are possibilities that we are closer than ever. So that is really, really exciting.
Yeah, there's hope. I think that's a
Yeah.
lot of, a lot of us want to look forward to that. There is hope with this disease progression. So,
And I think about my age, I got to do it for me. So you better be around when it's my time.
Okay, so brings me to my next question is, your grandma has it, my grandma has it. Is dementia hereditary? Do we have a higher likelihood? Like
we do. Yes, we do. So I will say this, though, the biggest risk factor is age. The older you get, the higher your risk. It's like any other part of your body, right? It's showing time, right? So age is the highest risk factor. Basically, if you hit 85, your risk goes up quite a bit. But by then, live your life, right? Enjoy. But yes, if you have a parent or a sibling that has Alzheimer's disease, your risk yourself is much higher.
Okay, so then we talk about age, right? So you said 85 or higher. What about those around 65, where you mentioned, we kind of joke around and say sometimers
Sure.
instead of Alzheimer's, but they're losing their keys a lot, or they're forgetting, it's like, gosh, I just seen this person last week. I don't know what their name is. Or, they walk into a different room and they're like, oh, well, I was supposed to come. I don't know what happened. I mean, let's be honest, it happens to me a lot. But are those little things, should someone really be on the lookout or kind of watch it if they're in that 65 to 75 age range?
Sure. And typically it is, the most common diagnosis happens 65 and older. I do know of some cases where they were diagnosed very early on, 50s, 40s, even 30s. But usually, at least in the cases I've seen, there's some other condition that person has genetically or whatever that's causing this to happen really early. For the most part, though, yeah, it's usually in the 60s and beyond. when you talk about some of these I forget where my keys are sometimes. And often after presentations like this, I will get a call or two saying, hey, I lost my keys. Do I have dementia? Now, the fact that you know you lost your keys tells me that I think you're fine, because that's something we normally do. But it's when you don't realize you've lost these things, or it happens so frequently that it's abnormal. Again, it's a change from your usual. That's when I think it would be something to consider checking out. Again, it could be something else, but when it starts to impede on your daily functioning or your daily life, I think that's when, you should definitely see a doctor, or at least talk to doctor about some of these changes.
Awesome. Talking a little bit about prevention, can dementia be prevented from happening in the first place?
Good question, Jeffrey. So as of now, no, but there are things that you can do to lower your risk. We'll put it that way. And guess what? They're not that difficult in a sense. So they're just like a lot of other diseases. It's diet, exercise, staying socially active with others, as well as for dementia, brain exercises. Now, that can be in the form of Sudoku is a popular one, word find, or even if you were to just read things that you don't usually read about. For example, if you are into, I don't know, knitting, and that's all you read, knitting magazines, go pick up a National Geographic and read about something else. I mean, those kinds of things that have your brain think about other things outside of your norm can help to build that, what we call cognitive reserve, because as you learn new things, you are building some, brain cells in there. They actually did some research on formal education. So if you've gone to college, typically your risk gets lowered because you've built a lot of that cognitive reserve. And I said college, but even if you were to, go to a class at, a senior center, those kinds of things outside of your norm where you're challenging yourself to do something new can be really helpful. So as far as prevention, we don't know how to do that yet. But again, there are some lifestyle things you can do. As far as diet, I should mention plant-based, surprise, right? I think we've heard that a lot, especially in our Blue Zones communities, plant-based diet. And one of the biggest things we saw during COVID, when people, when we got shut in, basically, that social networking went away for a lot of these folks, and that hit them hard. So staying active, whether it's at church, whatever, just go out and hang out with people can be helpful.
Thanks so much for that. I'm glad we talked a little bit about prevention because, it's so timely. I was actually talking to my mom yesterday about, memory loss, and she's like, oh my gosh, which she's watching on Facebook Live. Hi, Mom.
Hey, Mom.
But we did talk about that. We talked about,
Sure.
getting the Sudoku, getting the word search, going out and doing other things, exercising your brain to help combat those memory issues. Because like you said, let's be honest, we kind of all have them,
Yeah.
at one point or another, but
Yes.
exercising your brain definitely helps. So I know we just got 2 minutes. Nick, can you just tell us how can we make a positive difference in the life of someone who's living with dementia?
Sure. I think you heard it from some of the testimonies from some of those caregivers. And I would say they're real caregivers, by the way. I've met some of these people in our presentations, and they're real. I think it's just being kind, not just to them, but to yourself. It can be really hard and a lot of pressure on yourself to have to go through this. Like, that last lady who talked about the ship. I mean, you got to just jump on it and go, get ready and go. It's about just being able to get into their world, because eventually their world might not make sense to us, right? It's going to be whatever their brain is firing out. And as long as it's safe to do so, I say go with it and learn how to do that. Whether it's, learning those therapeutic fibs and just saying, yeah, that's what we're doing. Or, whatever it is that you can do to put on a show to make them feel comfortable and valued. I think that's really important, and just start to being kind and empathetic, like some of the caregivers said. I think another thing too is learn how to communicate without language or using other things. Sight, touch. Eventually people with dementia do lose the ability to use language. Like my grandpa stopped speaking English at the end, and we're like, okay, well, brush up on your Olelo Hawaii, because here we go, let's rock and roll. But using sight, sense of sight, smell, taste, touch, those kinds of things can be also very helpful for somebody, especially in the later stages. But great question.
Okay, awesome. And we are at the 11 o'clock hour. I know there's more questions, but we are unable to get to them at this time. Nick, can you just tell us what would be an encouraging word to our caregivers who's caring for their loved ones?
The biggest thing the biggest thing that you can do for yourself is reach out for help. I think, whether it's to me or somebody else, just don't do the journey alone. It's not going to be pretty. And this is just based off of my 14 years of working with families and caregivers like you. So, my family did not reach out in our first rodeo with my grandpa. And looking back, I thought, wow, there was so much we didn't reach out for. Luckily, we had each other, but not every caregiver has a good support system. So that's why we here at the association are, ready to support you through that journey. So reach out and take care of yourself as well.
Awesome. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nick. We are always so happy that you are here in the community, providing this education, providing these resources to help these caregivers, to help our loved ones with dementia. So thankful you carved out time in your busy day to join us on Talk Story. For all of the listeners, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for sending in all of your questions. Everyone on Facebook, thanks for sticking with us and sending in your alohas and where you guys are from. I so enjoyed this presentation, and I hope you did too. Nick also has a ton of resources that we can link on a follow-up email that we will send to everyone. But if you guys ever need, please reach out to Nick. And I also want to know that everyone is invited to next month's Fully Engaged Zoom presentation on Talk Story, Wednesday, November 8th. So a little bit different. We're changing up the time and day, but be on the lookout for that registration link as well, Instagram, Facebook, or on our hawaiicarechoices.org/healthcare talk story website. Mahalo again for joining us. Mahalo, Nick, for joining us. See you next
Mahalo for
month.
having me, Tish. Aloha, everyone.
Take care. Ahui ho. Palapapono.